Discard has never been better in Marvel Snap, and people are sleeping on it. I use this list to get to Infinite with a 68% win rate, one of my easiest Infinite climbs of all time, and this is the optimized version of Discard. This is a huge turnaround because just a month ago, Discard had never been worse because Spider-Ham was everywhere at 1 energy, and it completely shuts down your Apocalypse. However, it's now a 2 energy card. It's far less popular and therefore far less of an issue for this deck. The Gambit buff is particularly huge for this deck. An extra 2 points on Gambit is no joke. This adds an extra card into the deck because often it wouldn't make the cut at 1 power. That's a nice discard card. Big high roll potential, but it's also just so much fun to play. And Nakia also got buffed recently, and I really love her in discard decks. Nakia's biggest synergy has always been with Swarm. If you can discard your Swarms twice, you're going to end up with 4 of these bad boys, and therefore 1 point on Swarm at 4 is actually working out as 4 points. So Nakia on Swarm alone can often mean that Nakia is playing for 7 points, but of course she's going to be buffing up every single card in your hand. Let's build our deck from scratch so you can see how I arrived at this list and why it is the best list, but also what cards you could consider adding in and which cards could be replaced. Of course, the most important cards are our build-around cards are discard targets. If we play loads of discard cards, we're going to have no cards left in hand unless we're playing Apocalypse and Swarm. Apocalypse, the big powerhouse finisher in this deck, of course. You can often get him above 20 points, and it's just a really important card to have access to. When you don't have Apocalypse, you're often going to be retreating. The other discard target is Swarm. You often want to be holding your Swarms until turn 6 at 0 cost, so then you can just be playing them down into the locations that you need them. We're of course then also going to need to select some discard cards. There's a lot of them, but some are better than others. Modok is a must-have card, an absolute powerhouse. Often your best play is going to be Modok onto turn 5, discarding your whole hand, and then Apocalypse on turn number 6, maybe with some Swarms as well. Colleen Wing is also a huge card in this deck. She is extraordinary. Colleen Wing, very, very consistently able to discard your Swarms, and therefore you get 2 Swarms into your hand, setting up that M.O.D.O.K discard later on for 4 Swarms total. She is extraordinary. 4 power for 2 energy is already really good, but her ability is fantastic. Gambit is a must-have now at 3 power. He is really, really strong. Lady Sif has always been one of the best discard cards if you've got Apocalypse in hand. I also really am a big believer in Hellcow, and how could you not play this pixel variant? The most beautiful card art in the game. We're also playing Dracula, which is a discard card. Big synergy with M.O.D.O.K and Apocalypse. The optimal line with this one is going to be Dracula on turn 4, M.O.D.O.K on turn 5, discarding your whole hand, but then your Apocalypse is still going to remain there, and then you're going to play the card that you draw on turn 6. Spoiler alert, it's Chavez, and then Apocalypse will be discarded by Dracula. Let's say your Apocalypse is at 12 points, and then your Dracula discards it. Dracula, therefore, will go to 16 points, because the Apocalypse is going to get discarded by Dracula, go to 16, and Dracula will get that extra 4 points. As I mentioned, Chavez, key card in this deck. You guys know I love her. She's my favorite card in the game, but an absolute auto include with M.O.D.O.K. You're discarding your whole hand. You want to have something to play down on turn 6 for decent value. We're also, of course, going to be playing Morbius, a must-have in discard decks. Often it can go above 10, 20 points. Extraordinarily powerful on certain locations when your discards just go crazy. These 10 cards are crucial. I would put these in the deck every single time. I would never replace any of these. However, the last 2 cards are very flexible, and I've got a whole bunch of ideas that you could play in these slots. My favorite cards are going to be Nebula, because Nebula's great. This deck doesn't have any 1-cost cards. If you find Nebula on turn 1, just being able to play her down, she's often playing for 7, 9 points. I think she's just broken. If you don't have access to Nebula, though, don't panic. There's other options. Sunspot is one. It's not going to be as good, but Sunspot's the most like-for-like change, but I'm going to propose a few more expensive cards as options as well. Blade also could slot in here. It's a cheap card. It's got discard synergy too. And also, I'm a big fan of Nakia. I think she's just very, very solid. Often, you don't play her. You only play her with certain hands because we already have Sif, Gambit as very good cards to play on turn number 3. But Nakia is also a nice option, particularly when you have Swarm in hand. So the key replacements, if you don't have Nebula, Blade and Sunspot are going to be the most 2 like-for-like changes. However, you could also go for something more expensive. Storm is also an option in discard decks. Morbius, Dracula, both very good cards to win a Storm location. And finally, Lockjaw is a serious option in discard decks as well. I used to swear by Lockjaw in discard. However, it did get nerfed a few months ago, and actually discard was probably the deck impacted most by it. Next, we're going to talk about the optimal sequencing for a discard deck. The early game is always going to look pretty similar. If you have Nebula, you're going to play it. Then if you've got a 2-cost card, you're most likely going to play it. You do want to try and set your Colleen up onto Swarm. Never play Swarm from hand on turn 2. That is a huge error. Turn 3, you're just going to be playing your Gambit, your Sif, your Nakia, whatever you have access to. But turn 4 onwards is where things are going to change slightly depending on if you have Apocalypse in your hand or not. If you do have Apocalypse in your hand, the optimal line is going to be Dracula on turn number 4, M.O.D.O.K on turn number 5, discarding your whole hand, and then on turn 6, you're going to be drawing Chavez, and you're going to have an Apocalypse and potentially some Swarms in hand. You're going to play all your Swarms down, you're going to play your Chavez from hand, and then your Dracula is going to discard your Apocalypse, getting that extra 4 points. However, if you don't have Apocalypse in hand, on turn 4, you're most likely not going to want to play Dracula, but instead play something like a Hellcow, or even just something cheaper like a Colleen or whatever it might be. You could still play Modok on turn 5 to supercharge your Morbius, and then just play Chavez on turn 6. The key thing, though, is that you're going to end the game with no cards in hand if you Modok and you don't have Apocalypse in hand, so you're not going to want to play that Dracula on turn number 4. Let's talk about when to snap and when to retreat with this deck, because of course, that is always going to be the key to climbing in Marvel Snap. Discard is pretty competitive against most decks, and therefore the matchups don't tend to have a huge impact on snapping and retreating. Instead, we're going to decide when to snap and when to retreat based on how good our hand is, but also evaluating how good our opponent's early plays have been. So, how do you evaluate a good hand for discard, or how do you evaluate a bad hand? The most important thing is, do you have discard targets available? If you have a hand with no Swarm and no Apocalypse, and your opponent snaps on you, it could be a pretty good argument to just retreat, lose a cube, and then try and get them in the next few games. Of course, you could stay in and risk finding them later, but without discard targets, discard is completely terrible. The second thing to consider is, do you have a nice curve? For example, Nebula on turn 1 into Colleen discarding Swarm on turn number 2. With that kind of hand, you could very much consider snapping on turn 1 before you play your Nebula. A lot of people don't like snapping early because you might have a good curve but no Apocalypse in hand, but the odds are that you will draw your Apocalypse later on, and if you don't, and you just don't have enough points, you can always just retreat for 2 cubes later, because statistically the snap was still going to net you cubes overall. You had a really good chance of winning that game. You got a little bit unlucky, you move on. Finally, the third thing to consider when to snap and when to retreat with this deck is, what are your opponent's early plays like? For example, if they skip the first 2 turns, but you had a pretty good curve, you could then consider snapping. However, maybe you have a really amazing hand, like you've got Nebula on turn 1, you've got the Apocalypse in hand, but your opponent has played something like Bast on turn 1 and Zabu on turn 2. Potentially they're playing a Mr. Negative on turn 3. In those kinds of situations, you just need to bear in mind that discard is what I like to call a fair deck. It puts out very good points consistently, but it is going to get overrun by these super greedy decks, which just output 1,000,000 points won every 10 games. So a good hand is a solid early curve with discard targets, and a bad hand is no discard targets and a bad early curve. I hope this guide was helpful for you discard gamers out there. Make sure you give it a like, and I hope you enjoy this silver Conquest run with discard, as well as some of my favorite games on my climb to infinite with this deck. The support of you lot, so still pinching myself it happened really, and I'm super grateful. I think we can snap on Citadel with Morb in hand. Yeah, San Diego. So I was in San Diego for basically the whole week, like 5-6 nights. This hand is also like almost snap worthy. To be honest, I'm going to go for it. Admittedly, they did have Bast on 1, which makes it a little bit less good. All we're waiting for is, yeah, Mexican food was banging. Mexican food was the best kind of food I had. Actually, the nicest food I had the whole week was in LA. I went to like this Mexican place with my friend Payable, who's a Gwent player. Some of you will be familiar with him. We got like Mexican, and I had this like fish burrito. I don't even know what the fish was. It was like a white fish. She was like, you can have salmon or this other one, which I'd never heard of before. And I was like, I'll take the one I've never heard of. Hellcow, maybe. With Limbo, we have time to work with, right? Mr. Negative. Maybe we should have gone like Sif first. Yeah, Cal right for stats, that's true. I didn't even think of that. Someone got baited into playing Silver Surfer. Spoiler alert, guys. Silver Surfer is not the way to play Mr. Negative. It's in fact, I would argue, quite possibly the worst way to play it. GG. I'm going to snap. Neither of us played anything the first 2 turns, which means they have no Zabu Psylocke. We can be aggressive. I had a nice curve after turn 2, right? I was just missing the turn 2 play. Honestly. Let's be aggressive. I also am really wanting to get a new overlay. It's a priority for the week. So the plan is I'm going to be spending mornings doing videos and admin and stuff. And then the evenings streaming and kind of the middle of the day working out. So today I've done about 17,000 steps so far. Seems fine. Don't think so. Especially as we don't even have Morbius, it doesn't matter. I'm not sure the way this resolves. Like if I played Colleen, the swarm would get discarded first. It would go through and then she would come into my hand off Fats, I think. I do want to Modok the cloning Vats though. Because then Dracula has a target still. Hopefully. Or I can still, I guess I can just play M.O.D.O.K again instead, in fact, right? This was definitely correct. They didn't play negative, I'm not scared. We never run. They snapped when they didn't play negative, really. Not sure how I feel about this. This is the best way to make sure Dracula is actually good. Oh god. Oh god. It can't be that much. It's like Ironheart. Surfer. I think we're fine. Nice, let's go. Satisfying win. Humongous Dracula. Nakia into M.O.D.O.K is looking nice. We want to find the M.O.D.O.K and then we can go Nakia, Dracula. If we don't hit M.O.D.O.K, we maybe don't want to take the Dracula here. Yeah, let's go. Oh, mate, we're popping off. This is a snap. Let's get Morbius into Metropolis. We'll take the Colleen off to the right. We already have a lot of stats. This is so good. The 4-point swarms get discarded. And then the M.O.D.O.K is just supercharging the Morb here. We won't fill up the right lane. The M.O.D.O.K comes through. Morbius goes crazy. Shang-Chi's a problem. Cool. GG. That's a fun game. We'll start with Morb. We won't snap just yet. We're lacking really the M.O.D.O.K. Something like Colleen. That is very good for us. I think the hand's good enough to snap now as well. If we hit M.O.D.O.K off the top, we'll play Dracula this turn. Patriot's scary. They snap on us too. Oof. I mean, do we ever... I think we do. Let's roll the Gambit. Or perhaps Mystique. Oh, what a weird play. Oh! Oh my goodness, Gambit. That is disgusting. So Blue Marvel is the most points they can get left, I believe. So we just need to play to beat 19, which we're putting plenty down. Like something like Wasp into Vormir. I think that beats us. No, we're fine because we got the Patriot. We're fine. If Patriot was alive, it was a loss. Let's go, mate! Gambit completely high rolled. We were never winning this without Gambit. Hence why they conceded when they did. It seemed like a random free, like, they gave me an extra cube, but it was only for a cube. We'll take the Sif. Seeing a bit of a comeback of Angel. COD, I think, is very underrated. Come on, hit the A.P.O.K, for the love of God. Thank you. Let's roll the Gambit. Not bad. Not great. GG. Easy one. Thank you. Alright, 2 cubes away. Don't hate Gambit in Dark Dimension. It does actually need a target though still, so maybe it's not that good. We're better off going for Nakia, but I guess we could also put M.O.D.O.K into Dark Dimension, so Gambit will still have a target. I'm snapping as well. This is the game for infinite. We only needed 2 cubes. If they concede, we get infinite. We just have such a nice curve here with M.O.D.O.K on 5. I'm gonna go here for stats, just stat distribution. Well, it's unfortunate, we low rolled. Rip Wasp, get wrecked. Is it Hela or something that they're playing? Why would there be a Wasp if it was... I guess you could play Wasp in Hela. Sounds a bit scuffed. Patriot, Mystique. I think I see where this is going. Shang-Chi doesn't go through. They beat us to the left. The question is, do they beat us to the right? And oh my god, I think they bloody do. Oh, they're all at 5. It's the last Hellas that's buffing them all up, so we get it. Let's go. What a way to get infinite rank with Discard. A really, really very solid deck. It was out of the meta completely because of because of Spider-Ham, but Discard is back, baby.